What would you do if the people who erased you suddenly begged you to come home? My name is Eleanor Hartman, but in Savannah, most people just call me Judge Hartman. That title didn't come easy, and it definitely wasn't gifted. 5 years ago, I walked away from the only people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, my family. They didn't just shame me, they erased me, cut me out like I was a stain on their perfect legacy. And now, they want me back. As if the last 5 years had never happened. It started with a letter. No, technically, it was a wedding invitation. Thick cream cardstock, the Hartman family crest, stamped in gold like some kind of royal decree. Inside was a note, scribbled in the shaky handwriting I hadn't seen since the day I left. Please come. I miss you. They don't know I'm writing. Mom. My hands trembled as I held it, not from fear, from everything it dragged back with it. The laughter, the silence. The night Nathan, my older brother, stood up and toasted my failure like it was a punchline. They thought I was beneath them because I chose to fight for people no one else cared about. Courtrooms full of the forgotten, long nights studying law while they drank wine over crystal decanters. What they never knew, because they never asked, was that I became a judge at 35. A real one. But to them, I was still the black sheep. And now Nathan Darling of the Hartmans was getting married. To Rachel Moore, a rising star in housing rights law. Funny how life works. I stared at the invitation for a long time under the kitchen light. Not out of nostalgia, but because something was rising in me. Not anger, not grief, resolve. I wasn't going back to prove anything, not to flaunt my success. I was going back because I was done letting their silence define me. Would you walk back into the lion's den if your family had cast you out? Would you forgive them? Would you fight? I didn't know yet, but I was about to find out. The last words I heard from my brother weren't goodbye. They were a punchline, and I was the joke. Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. The last time I stood in the same room as my family. I remember the scent of rosemary stuffed turkey, the soft clink of fine crystal, the kind of tension that doesn't scream it, whispers behind napkins and clenched jaws. Nathan, always the golden boy, always just tipsy enough to be cruel, stood swirling a glass of Bordeaux like he was giving a TED Talk, and then he said it. Some of us choose to serve the family legacy. Others... He paused, smirked, seemed determined to disgrace it. Laughter rippled across the table, that brittle, uncertain kind of laugh, the kind where no one's sure if it's okay to laugh, but they do it anyway because silence is worse. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass, her lips pressed into a razor-thin line. My father. He stared at the centerpiece like I didn't exist. I was 29, a public defender, freshly sworn in, exhausted but proud, fighting for people without voices, without choices. But to the Hartmans, that wasn't noble. It was embarrassing. That night, I folded my napkin with more dignity than anyone in that room had shown me. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just stood, and I walked out. No one followed me, no one called, and then the silence began. Days became weeks. Weeks became years. The distance between us turned into something no apology could cross. And now, years later, I sat in my kitchen staring at that wedding invitation like it was a ghost. Nathan Hartman and Rachel Moore. I didn't know Rachel personally, but I knew her type. Polished. Precise. The kind of woman my family adored. Still, my mother's note was a crack in the stone wall they'd built between us. I needed to talk to someone who remembered who I really was. So I called Dana, my best friend since law school. I got the invitation, I said. There was a pause. Ellie, are you really thinking of going? I rubbed my forehead. I don't know. Part of me wants to burn it. Another part, maybe it's time. Dana's voice softened. Not for them, she said. For you. That night's sleep didn't come easy. My mind was loud with memories and what-ifs. I found myself pulling out an old box from the back of my closet. Inside was a letter yellowed at the edges, written in the firm, steady hand of the only family member who ever truly saw me, my grandfather. Real power isn't loud, Ellie. It's standing tall without pushing others down. You weren't born to be their favorite. You were born to outgrow them. I pressed the paper to my chest and let it ground me. 5 years is a long time to carry a wound. Maybe it was time to stop letting it bleed. The next morning, I knew. I wasn't going back to win their approval. I was going back to reclaim my peace. Sometimes walking back into the past isn't weakness. It's the boldest move you can make. The morning I decided to go back, Savannah was wrapped in a soft silver mist. I stood at my window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the world blur behind a thin film of fog. For the first time in years, the thought of facing my family didn't send panic rushing through my veins. It sent something else: stillness, strength. I pulled out my laptop and typed in a name that hadn't crossed my mind in months. Rachel Moore. I needed to know exactly who Nathan was marrying. It didn't take long. The internet had plenty to say. She wasn't ornamental. She was a fighter, a rising star in housing law, fierce, articulate, beloved by tenant rights groups, and then buried in a news archive I found it. 8 months ago, she'd stood in my courtroom, arguing passionately for a group of tenants being pushed out of their homes. I hadn't made the connection at the time. No smug glances, no name-dropping. Just a young lawyer doing the right thing. I sat back in my chair, an ironic smile tugging at my lips. Nathan, the man who had once laughed at my career, was about to marry a woman shaped by the very rulings I had made from the bench. Life, it seemed, had a sense of humor. But going back wasn't just about appearances. It would cost something, emotionally, mentally. I called Dana again. "What do you want from this?" she asked softly. I hesitated. Closure, maybe. Or maybe just to stop feeling like I ran away. "Then go," she said. "But go for you. Not to prove anything to them." That night I opened the velvet box that held my grandfather's gift, a simple silver pendant shaped like Lady Justice. He had given it to me when I passed the bar. It wasn't a weapon. It was a reminder. The next morning I mailed the RSVP, and before heading to court I made a quiet detour. The cemetery was still the ground damp from early rain. I knelt by my grandfather's grave and set a small bouquet of lilies against the marble. "You always saw me," I whispered, "even when no one else did." I reached into my coat, pulled out the letter he had once written, and read it again. His words had carried me through every late night and courtroom war. They carried me now. As I stood to leave, I felt something shift inside me. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. Later that day, as I climbed the courthouse steps, a clerk nodded and said, "Morning, Judge." I smiled. Just a little. That small recognition had anchored me. Whatever waited for me at that wedding, I wouldn't be walking in as the girl they mocked. I'd be walking in as the woman I became. The Hartman estate was exactly as I remembered it. Grand, gilded, cold. The driveway gleamed with cars worth more than entire neighborhoods. Inside, everything buzzed with that forced cheer only old money could sustain. Waiters glided through the crowd, balancing flutes of champagne. Laughter rang just a touch too loud. I moved past the entryway, past the wall lined with photos of Nathan, his whole life displayed in high-resolution milestones. Baby Nathan, graduation Nathan, medical board Nathan. Me, I wasn't on those walls. I had been cut out like I never existed. In the side parlor, I heard the whispers start. She actually came. I heard she's just a traffic judge. Well, it's not like she's doing real work. Their words brushed against me like thorns, but I didn't flinch. Not anymore. The ballroom was a cathedral of excess. Garish flowers, towers of champagne, a jazz quartet, humming quietly near the fireplace. I found my seat tucked between two cousins who barely looked my way. Across the room, Nathan stood with a whiskey in hand, one arm draped around Rachel. She looked radiant, every bit the bride-to-be, but something flickered in her eyes, something that didn't match the smile she wore. Then a chime rang out, glass tapping glass. Nathan raised his drink. "Thank you all for being here. It means the world to Rachel and me to have our family gathered to celebrate the future of the Hartman name." Polite applause. Then his eyes swept the room. Paused just for a breath on me. "We're grateful," he continued, "for all kinds of success stories, even the unconventional ones." The laughter that followed sliced through the air, not loud, but sharp, calculated. I let it pass. Then I stood. The room fell into a stunned hush. I walked to the grand piano and placed a plain manila folder on its polished surface. With slow, deliberate hands, I opened it, and the real story began. They tried to erase my story, so I wrote a new one and read it out loud. Under the chandelier's golden light, I opened the folder. Silence tightened around the room like a noose. Inside, headlines printed in bold. Judge Hartman recognized for judicial excellence. Champion for housing justice. Wins state commendation. Articles, awards, letters of recommendation from the state bar, photographs of swearing-in ceremonies, transcripts of landmark decisions, all bearing one name, Eleanor Hartman. I lifted one letter slowly, unfolded it, read it aloud, for outstanding service in judicial equity and commitment to public interest law. My voice didn't shake, not once. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the overhead lights and somewhere a camera shudder. I let the silence stretch. Then I said it softly, lightly, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Funny. For someone who supposedly couldn't handle life, I seemed to have kept rather busy. Gasps fluttered around the ballroom like startled birds. Some looked away. Others couldn't stop staring. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Rachel. Her gaze locked on the folder. Confusion flickered. Recognition dawned. Then her expression sharpened into something fierce and crystal clear. She turned to Nathan, eyes narrowed. "You lied." Not loud, not dramatic, but her voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Nathan's mouth opened. No sound came out. He looked like someone had pulled the stage out from under his feet. Rachel reached for her left hand, slid the engagement ring off her finger, and then calmly, deliberately, she set it on the piano beside my folder. She turned to me, met my eyes. "Thank you." One word. But it held everything understanding respect. Liberation. And then she walked away. Chin high, steps unhurried. She didn't look back. The golden boy image Nathan had worked so hard to construct collapsed in real time without a single scream or thrown glass. I stayed at the piano a moment longer, let the silence speak, let it settle deep in their ribs. Then I gathered my folder, tucked it under my arm, and returned to my seat. The party limped forward. Laughter resumed too loud. The jazz quartet played on. But something had shifted. The foundation beneath them had cracked, and they knew it. When silence didn't work, they turned to lies. But I had come prepared. By the time I got home that night, my dress unzipped my feet, bare a glass of water in hand. My phone was already buzzing, not from family, from headlines, but not the big networks. No, Nathan was smarter than that. These were the shadows, gossip blogs, tabloid sites, the clickbait underbelly of the internet. Anonymous source claims Judge Hartman bullied her way to the bench. Former classmates say Eleanor Hartman was emotionally unstable. Who is the real Judge Hartman? I stared at the screen, exhaled slowly, let the sting settle, then fade. This was Nathan's playbook, dirty, petty, predictable. But what he didn't know was that I had seen it coming. The moment I made the decision to attend the wedding, Dana and I started preparing. We compiled everything: judicial appointments, peer reviews, press features, community impact reports. We put together a truth package. No rants, no drama, just facts. The next morning, while Savannah stretched beneath a pale spring sun, I logged onto my public channels and posted just one thing. A quote. Facts are stubborn things. John Adams, and with it the truth, laid out in plain sight. Within hours, the tide began to turn. Not just quietly, but loudly. Former clients, colleagues, housing advocates, law professors, they stepped forward. Not because I asked them to, but because they wanted to. They told their stories. They spoke about what I had done, who I really was. The public saw through the smear campaign like glass. Local radio stations picked it up. News anchors dissected the timing, the motive. Nathan's PR firm dropped him. His pending medical board invites rescinded. His donors gone. The golden glow he had clung to gone in a matter of days. Reputation shattered. And my family, they did what the Hartmans always did when the heat turned up. They tried to vanish into silence, issued polite statements, distanced themselves. But this time, silence wasn't safe. This time, silence meant guilt. The calls started trickling in. Second cousins, aunts, even people who'd once laughed along with Nathan. "We always believed in you, Ellie. We never liked how they treated you. You're stronger than all of them combined. Too little. Too late." I didn't answer any of them, because the truth, my truth, had already done what 5 years of arguing, apologizing, and shrinking never could. It stood, solid, unshakable, undeniable, and I turned my focus not to the past but forward. A few weeks later, the letter came, a sealed envelope, federal insignia in the corner, inside my appointment as a federal judge. Not because of my name, not because of my family, because I had earned it. Every sleepless night, every case no one wanted, every courtroom I walked into alone. When I signed the acceptance letter, my hand didn't shake. When I dropped it into the outgoing mail, I didn't look back. They tried to write me out of the story. So I built a new one, and this time I wrote every word. 1 year later, spring came soft and fragrant to Savannah, the kind of evening that makes the air feel like silk. I stood at the entrance of the Savannah Community Foundation Gala, a quiet cornerstone of the city I loved. This wasn't a red carpet event. There were no marble columns, no family crests, no desperate performances for approval. Just neighbors, advocates, teachers, public defenders, the people who built things that mattered brick by brick, case by case. I wasn't here for prestige. I had helped organize it because it mattered, because the community I served long before anyone knew my name deserved to be celebrated. I wore a simple black gown, no designer label, no flashy jewelry, just the silver Lady Justice pendant resting against my collarbone, still and strong. It didn't need to shine. It had already seen the fire. As I moved through the crowd, I saw familiar faces, not relatives, but the ones who had become family in every way that counted. Colleagues who fought beside me in court, neighbors who watched me rise with quiet pride, young lawyers I had mentored, wide-eyed, curious, determined. And then I saw her, Rachel. She stood near the back of the room, half-shadowed by soft uplighting and conversation. She wasn't the woman I'd seen at the engagement party. She wasn't even the one who had taken off the ring and walked out. She was someone new, someone whole. No gown, no mask, just jeans, a blouse, and a strength that didn't need to prove itself. When she crossed the room, she didn't come with apology. She didn't flinch. She offered her hand, not in pity, not in regret, in recognition, and I took it. For a moment, the hum of the room softened music. Laughter, clinking glass, all melted into quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something. We weren't Hartmans anymore. We weren't ghosts of some old broken family. We were ourselves, free and unedited. Later that night, I found myself alone by the wide windows overlooking the Savannah River. The city shimmered across the water, and I reached for my pendant fingers grazing its worn surface. They tried to erase me, I thought. But I wrote a better story instead. One built not on legacy, but on truth. Not on blood, but on conviction. Not on permission, but on power I never needed them to grant. Because here's the thing no one tells you. Sometimes the deepest scars don't come from strangers. They come from the people who were supposed to love you first, but scars aren't the end of the story. Sometimes they're just where it begins. Have you ever faced something like this? A family that tried to erase you? Share your story below. Let your voice be heard. And if this hit home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of strength, truth, and the power of reclaiming your place.